The Innkeeper by Life Sketcher. Chapter 1231 Too Fast. To be clear, while Lex unleashed all his power, this attack was far from the strongest attack he could unleash. He had not even used any of his numerous affinities, nor had he used any glyphs or arrays to empower this attack, nor had he used domination, or even considered using laws. What he unleashed was simply the physical strength of his body, as well as his sword intent. Combined, his attack manifested in a bright white light that clashed against the electric beast, hundreds of times larger than Lex. The attack and the lightning bolt, for a moment, forced each other to a standstill where they met, and the world around Lex suffered from its devastation. Everyone near Lex died, and those watching from afar felt like they had been struck by a mighty blow even though they were quite far. Save the platform where Lex stood, which was preserved through Lex's own power, the ground all around him was shattered completely into fine dust. Time seemed to pause, or maybe it just felt like that because all sound in existence vanished. Then Lex's sword strike, which had paused against the claw of the lightning beast, sliced through it. The once dark zone of the trial was suddenly filled with blinding, pure white light, and absolute silence. The storms raged, and formed into devastating hurricanes not of wind but of pure energy. The ground erupted in 1,000 different places, and a deep ocean of lava buried deep underground found cracks to escape through, resulting in countless volcanic eruptions. The wild energies of the realm, instead of being depleted by the massive tribulation, were aggravated. Like the dense rains of monsoon, lightning beat at the ground, or rather specifically at the erupting volcanoes, like water falling from the clouds. Yet all of this devastation happened in silence, for the air itself had been blown away by Lex's strike. Yet it was only enough to begin the process. Most of his body still had not suffered the burns of lightning. Yet the clouds above him, though still dense, remained suspiciously empty of lightning all around him. Freed from the first step of his tribulation, he turned to look towards the frowning wyvern in the distance. Geoffrey had truly not expected Lex to survive that tribulation. It was genuinely strong enough to directly kill even 3rd or 4th level Earth immortals, yet Lex took it head on. His plan had failed, but all was not lost. The environment in the trial had changed drastically, and it looked like he was standing on the site of Armageddon. With how chaotic the environment was, it would be much easier to kill the others. He just had to be extra careful not to get himself hurt. But first, Geoffrey turned to look towards Lex, and was startled to see Lex standing just a few feet from him, his skin starting to crack as black smoke escaped from within. "You asked me a few questions, I believe," Lex said, his voice incredibly hoarse. "About how I feel. Why don't I answer that for you now?" "Huh?" Geoffrey snorted. "Are you really threatening me in the midst of your tribulation? You should be running and hiding, not." The wyvern's words were cut short when the cold, silver blade of Naraka cut through his neck, faster than the wyvern could follow. The head slowly slid off from the neck. Now if he were immortal, that would have killed him. But the annoying thing about immortals was how difficult it was to actually kill them. The wyvern's body turned to mist, as if it had been a mirage all along, and some distance away it reformed, the wyvern looking at Lex with genuine shock and concern. Lex had not even passed his tribulation yet. He had not achieved an immortal body yet. How could he be so fast? The answer was simple. This was merely the strength he had when he unsealed his power. Lex appeared in front of the wyvern again, faster than it could comprehend. All it saw was a white flash of his sword intent as Lex cut off its neck once more. Chapter 1232 All according to plan. While Lex's fire tribulation occurred, he could not control any spiritual energy at all, since even his meridians were burning. In fact, since his muscles were burning as well, he should not have been able to exert much strength either. In reality, he was already physically weaker than he was when he fought against the lightning bolt. But Lex had the confidence to dominate against anyone in the immortal realm, at least when it came to physical abilities. Once matters of laws got involved, he was not arrogant enough to think that he could suddenly surpass everyone. After all, even if he had been playing with laws for a few years, most immortals had been learning about laws for at least a few decades or centuries. He had seen how abstract the world became once laws got involved, so Lex would not make a flat statement that he was unbeatable in the same realm as he had always been. He needed to get used to the rules and combat as far as immortals were concerned. But as far as physique was concerned, Lex did not even fear dragons. "How does it feel, Jeffrey?" Lex asked in his raspy voice, holding on to the wyvern's head as its body disappeared. He did not allow the head to disappear, putting it instead in his spatial ring. Even then, when the wyvern was reformed some distance away, it had a new head. "How does it feel knowing that I can clone your body as much as I want, and feed my cattle wyvern barbecue for the rest of eternity using only your body? I'm getting pretty good at decapitation. Maybe I can practice skinning next, get myself a wyvern pelt." Lex closed his eyes, but even then his aim never missed as he swung Naraka and cut through the wyvern's neck. His sword hungrily drank the wyvern's blood, becoming stronger and more effective against its kind with every drop it absorbed. This was not a feature of the sword Lex knew about, but he was definitely enjoying it. Every second they fought, Lex was getting weaker and weaker as his insides burnt. Yet even in such a state, Jeffrey could barely follow Lex's silhouette as he moved, which infuriated him to no end. Fortunately, the moment had arrived. Jeffrey mustered his strength and launched an attack on Lex, determined to kill him during the tribulation. Though Jeffrey would suffer a mild backlash for interfering with a tribulation, he would accept it in exchange for Lex's death. His attack, a red beam of fire he breathed out, swiftly approached Lex, but as it touched the boundary of the platform he was standing on, it dispersed. At some point, undetected by everyone, Lex had laid out numerous protective formations inside the platform where he stood. Such blatant goading infuriated the wyvern even more, causing it to unleash its strongest attacks as it battled with its sanity and its desire for revenge. Never had it been so humiliated. It was always Jeffrey doing the humiliation. Always him. Yet now, he was being played by a mere human. While the wyvern unleashed its fury, the figure who had been watching everything from a distance shook its head in disappointment. Wyverns were the cousins of dragons, some would say. But they were the disappointment in the family. The figure stepped forth into the light, revealing deep purple scales adorning its reptilian body and massive wings. He was a newborn dragon, whose early years had been spent on the black dwarf that served as the holy land for the newer generation of dragons, being slowly nurtured to match its noble heritage. It had been sent away from his nursery prematurely, to participate in the inane champions tourney, all for the sake of reaching the heretic Lex and bringing him to justice. How dare he bear the name of Dragonsbane? He would suffer the consequences. Yet this newborn dragon, while considerably strong, was also smart. There was no reason to take any enemy at his strongest. Now that he was weakened considerably, it was time for the dragon to make his move, and bring glory to his race. Chapter 1233 A Real Dragon. Usually, dragons were arrogant beyond measure. It was one of the defining characteristics of their race, and one of the most significant reasons why they did not band together like most other races, keeping themselves weak relatively speaking. Other races usually all lived close to one another, built entire societies living in close proximity, and aided each other, or at least traded with each other. Dragons, instead, were extremely territorial, to the extent that some strong dragons monopolized entire galaxies for themselves, keeping other dragons away. At most, they would tolerate only their own descendants within those territories, that too until they were strong enough to carve out their own territories. In fact, the inability of dragons to stay together for long was one of the most significant causes for dragonoids. They usually could not stay close to one another long enough to mate, not unless one was significantly and unquestionably stronger than the other. Their arrogance was, without a doubt, one of the things that held them back as a race. But while, in general, dragons were arrogant, that did not mean that all of them were ruled by it. Some of them, the ones with the strongest bloodlines and most promise for the future, were trained from the very moment of their birth to not let their arrogance rule them. The purple-scaled dragon was exactly one such dragon. His arrogance was such that he did not recognize wyverns as having anything to do with dragons at all, even though they were a mutation of him. At the same time, he did not let his arrogance let him act without reconnaissance on the target, or go straight in for a kill. Instead, he observed Lex and came to a conclusion that the human, despite his weak race, was genuinely a threat to him. While still not immortal, he could influence laws with his body alone. So he waited till Lex was weakened. Lex showed remarkable resilience in the face of the lightning tribulation, but the constraints of the fire tribulation could not be escaped. Now that he had retreated to the platform, it meant that he was approaching his weakest. The dragon saw no shame in taking advantage of his opponent's weakness. That was simply how the world worked. What this meant in the short term was that Lex was completely undefended, save for the formation he had secretly set up. Yet when the dragon used its innate influence over the world, it felt challenged back. His dragon's might was being challenged by the remnant auras of domination. More importantly, while forming this formation, Lex had used the influence of glyphs, which were just weaker versions of the abilities of dragons. Yet even with the weaker version, Lex was dominating against this young dragon, rendering its abilities completely inert. Feeling challenged, the dragon spread his wings completely, and let his aura to bear. Dragon's might was only the simplest of a dragon's abilities. It had greater ones to use, and it was not afraid of using them. His purple scales suddenly changed, almost becoming liquid flames, as it lunged forward at the platform. Since the dragon willed it, so it must be. The laws of the region influenced by dragons might suddenly started to change, automatically falling under the influence of the dragon's will, as if submitted to it. The dragon's fiery claws struck against Lex's defense, and left a significant mark, as for the first time the barrier quaked. Yet that was only the beginning, and soon even the laws of the barrier itself fell under the dragon's control. Lex had dealt with Pelvalin, but he had never faced a living dragon before. Now he was finally a witness to its might, except that he could not actually witness it. A moment later, the barrier fell. Chapter 1234 Heal. Lex had always excelled at defense, even after he stopped using Regal Embrace. Even without the cultivation technique, the foundation and understanding it gave him were beyond what could be so easily achieved. Upon that foundation he built a deep and thorough understanding of defense by studying various powerful techniques, formations, and various associated concepts. He was quite confident that his defense would not be so easily overturned. He was correct. It was not easy. It actually required a dragon with a powerful heritage to become serious to break through his defenses. In the entire Origin realm, the number of Earth immortals who could have achieved that were not many compared to the whole. They were all exceptional, each and every one of them. Under ordinary circumstances, Lex would not encounter such beings. But the problem was, the more he pursued the extraordinary, the more he would encounter such unique and exceptional beings. The/W novel chapters are p/u/blished on. In that case, building a defense that, for example, 80% of those in his realm could not overcome was actually incredibly impressive, but for Lex specifically it was a catastrophic failure. That meant he was still weak to those 20% of beings. He did not need to be more powerful than just the masses, he needed to be the absolute best. Otherwise, in situations like his current one, where the best from across the realm were gathered together, there were bound to be those among the 20% who could break through his defenses. That distinction between amazing and the absolute best was being able to overcome even those exceptional races who had unfair advantages that humans lacked, such as the dragons themselves. The dragon was trying to get up. It was genuinely doing its best to resist, but an invisible force kept it down. The pure momentum of his attack had caused him to crash into Lex. Considering the sharpness of his claws and the heat of his flames, it was no surprise that a hole was burned into Lex's suit. That was the extent of the damage, though Lex was still unharmed for the most part. It was uncertain if his charred skin on his chest was due to his own fire tribulation or the dragon's attack. Either way, such minimal damage would do nothing to even a mortal, let alone Lex. The reason this situation had turned out like this was simple. Lex had lost complete control of his body as he felt like even his memories were burning. As a result, his body let go of all its restraints, and a 10-foot region around Lex became his absolute domain. His domination, which he had trained and honed for so long, using not just a heavenly immortal dragon but various other powerful auras as well, not to mention the natural enhancements his aura received from the boost in his personal rise in the cosmic ascendance spectrum from bonding with Lotus and absorbing the amber chaos resin, was completely unleashed in this region in full force. Much like when Lex encountered Pelvalin's body for the first time, and was faced with his dragon's might, the purple dragon encountered Lex's domination. The difference was that at that time, Pelvalin's dragon might had been in a relaxed state, not to mention the complete and total loss of its soul, which was the only reason Lex could even tolerate it to begin with. Lex was far from being relaxed, as his entire being was burning, which resulted in his domination being unleashed in full force, albeit in a smaller region. Lastly, since Lex knew he had pissed off dragons, he had been specifically training to make his domination more effective against them. All of that resulted in the fact that, through sheer, unconscious aura alone, Lex had caused a dragon to heal. Any semblance of sanity Jeffrey had reclaimed completely evaporated as he saw the sight. He knew that, as was his habit, he had provoked Lex excessively. The difference was, unlike every other weakling and human he had ever provoked, Lex actually had the capability to hurt him. A dangerous glint flashed through his eyes as he began contemplating something desperate. But he was so focused on Lex, he did not notice that in the distance, another human was slowly approaching him, one with a metallic sheen. Chapter 12:35 Disappointing. Larry genuinely thought he got over the trauma of meeting that old, mature man back on Earth. The very one he and Marlowe had gone after to capture, the one who set up the entire Dershaw family's demise. The one who kidnapped those who remained. There were days where Larry genuinely felt like he got over the memory of that man telling him that he had left Earth while kidnapping all of Larry's family. Jeffrey, that old sick bastard, had set up countless wars on Earth just for his amusement, and as he left the planet was the one responsible for inciting the AI invasion that ultimately led to the present circumstances on that planet. A majority of its original residents were gone or dead, and the remaining ones were devout followers of a few deities who used them to farm divine energy to fuel their own war against the AI. But no matter how much he tried, he could never actually forget. That is why, when he was suddenly contacted by Raphael, Marlowe's son, who claimed he had a lead on Jeffrey, he did everything possible to follow Raphael's plan. Apparently, Raphael wanted to stop Jeffrey because he had secret information that Jeffrey was going to do something countless times worse than what he did on Earth. Larry didn't care. He just wanted revenge, and maybe to actually find out if his family was even alive. Raphael had been more than clear that Larry himself could not harm Jeffrey, as he was not anywhere close to his level of strength. But there was something Jeffrey could do that no one else could, which would be a tremendous help in taking him down. So he approached the monstrous wyvern in the distance, finding it a little hard to believe that it was the same as the man who had orchestrated the destruction of Larry's entire life. Then again, Larry himself was no longer a simple human, so it was not difficult to imagine that others were far from simple as well. Larry turned his entire body into metal, eliminating any and all organic matter in his body, thereby hiding any and all signs of a living being. This was a simple thing for him, but it was surprisingly effective in hiding from higher-level cultivators. Their spirit senses would often just sense him as a piece of metal that blended in with the ground. Lex could slowly feel his control over his body returning, and he felt that his condition was terrible. It was genuinely incredible how thorough and evenly spread out the burning was. He could see how this would kill almost anyone else. For better or for worse, he could feel the burning process come to an end, and his body forming some kind of connection to the universe itself, and a massive surge of vitality feeding into his charred body, filling it with strength and life anew. But at the same time, it felt hollow. As someone who had been dealing with laws for a while already, he could tell that his body could deal with laws now. But since he had an affinity for laws, he could always do that. He was just better at it now. It was disappointing and confusing. Lex expected so much more. He tried to figure out what was missing when the vitality came flooding in, and his internally charred body began to morph into something much greater. Yet more importantly, the vitality, if that was even the right word for a kind of energy that would perfectly rebuild his body, mind, and soul and elevate them to a whole new level, began to condense into something solid within him, yet just as it was on the verge of formation, his connection to it became stronger, and Lex suddenly realized what was missing. His body had been converted, but his tenet was not formed. Now, with this immortal vitality under his control, he could directly form whatever tenet, or tenets, he wanted. Yet there was a catch. The amount of energy he had access to was limited, so for each tenet he formed, he would be dividing the energy equally. It did not matter. He already knew what he wanted, and it was a single tenet. The energy converged, and Lex finally gave form to the tenet he had been trying to decide on for a long time. Chapter 1236 Eyes. Supremacy. It was one word, and it did not require much explanation. It was self-evident. The tenet that Lex chose, after considering his numerous affinities and abilities and strengths, the tenet he decided on was supremacy. That was not to say that Lex was giving up on anything he already had, far from it. It was precisely because he didn't want to give up on anything that he went for supremacy. For a while he contemplated perfection, but it did not have the same feel to it. In anything and everything that he wanted to do, he wanted absolute supremacy. To be absolutely sure this was exactly what he was thinking, he even checked a dictionary for the definition. Supremacy was the state or condition of being superior to all in authority, power, or status. Lex wanted supremacy in everything he desired to pursue. Regal embrace put him on the path to having the best defense in the universe, but Lex put himself on a much harder path. He wanted the best defense, the best offense, the best speed, the best of everything. Which is why, in any and everything that he did, he wanted to be supreme. 4 new novels. He wanted his domination to be so strong, Dragon's might was compared to it rather than it compared to Dragon's might. He wanted his defense to be so impenetrable that all hope would be lost at the mere thought of overcoming it. Lex wanted his attack to be so devastating, just the thought of it would be enough to defeat his foes. Whether it was his ability to manipulate space, or his ability to heal, or his ability to talk to a pretty girl without his mind shutting down, he wanted to be the best at them all. Since his goal was to become the strongest so that he could run his in peace, which was essentially an impossible, unachievable goal, then why should he limit his impossible goal? Why not aim for something even more impossible? So that is exactly what Lex did. The darkness of the trial of eternity, the empty space of the origin realm, the sky of the midnight realm, the crystal realm, and every other single realm in the entire universe where humanoid beings existed, a phenomenon occurred. There was a figure of a man, shrouded in gold and black, his features completely hidden. Only his eyes, closed, could be seen clearly, and since only they could be seen, they drew the attention of all. Every human, mermaid, angel, devil, elf, dwarf, giant, celestial, and any other kind of humanoid race in existence looked up at those eyes, and felt a deep connection. In the primary realm, inside Gaia's graveyard, the being who stood at the peak of power in the universe looked up and saw those eyes. Yet before he could see the secrets they contained, he felt something veil the secrets behind a mystical shroud, keeping them out of reach. His pupils dilated as shock filled his body. Someone powerful enough to compete with him had just woken up something that was supposed to have been impossible. "Bother my children no more," a gentle, feminine whisper spoke in his ear, and the man suddenly lost sight of all humanoid beings he had been keeping an eye out across the universe, as well as certain memories of them. Any information that might allow him to determine the source of the phenomenon was lost to him, and so he forgot about Lex's existence entirely. "Nuwa," he muttered with an angry growl. But then confusion flashed through his eyes, and he turned to look at the corpse inside his vault. If Nuwa was still alive, whose corpse did he have in his vault? The answers to these questions eluded him, just as the sight of those two eyes eluded him. For a brief moment in time, almost everyone of significance in the entire universe was looking at those eyes, waiting for something to happen. Then the eyes opened. Chapter 1237 Power. Upstodati from. It was incredibly rare for a single phenomenon to affect the entire universe. Although there were many who could cause such a thing if they consciously tried, none of them were stupid enough to try. Even a Tao Lord could not tolerate the attention of the entire universe. Or at least the realms which contained humanoid beings, which was still a pretty big portion of it. That is why when exactly such a thing happened, many could not help but feel extremely curious. Many immortals, and even Tao Lords, of various races tried to peer into the secret of the figure. Yet whether they used divinity, or looked into the laws, or touched upon the Tao, all of them gave them no feedback. It was as if a more powerful, more mysterious force had shrouded the truth. More than the actual figure itself, the inability to peer into its secrets aroused great attention and alarm. Hearts were stirred, temptations were stimulated, morales were affected. The universe, in that moment, was intrigued. Then the eyes opened. They were the only part of the figure not obscured, so many were interested to see what they would reveal. Indeed, as per expectation, the eyes were far from ordinary. The left eye was similar to the eye of an ordinary immortal, in that it was an eye of law. Basically, it was an eye that could see laws. Yet somehow, this left eye had achieved a deeper, more mystical state where it could not only perceive laws, but thoroughly study and understand them. In that left eye, all the observers saw their own lives reflected, but not as they remembered it, but rather through the changes in laws they had experienced in their own lives, whether they were aware of it or not. Instantly, a good deal of those observing fell into a state of epiphany. Lex himself, meanwhile, was woefully ignorant of the fact that he was undergoing another tribulation. Part of it was because he was so strong, the lightning did not affect him nearly as much as it would affect others. Another part of it was because he was still getting used to his tenet, and beginning to understand how he would use it to influence the laws of the universe. Even though Lex himself was a bit of a cheat, and had been handling laws since before he became an immortal, in truth it was extremely dangerous. The slightest mistake could have crushed him completely. Even now, as an immortal, he would not be influencing laws directly. Instead, he would use his tenet to influence laws, bringing about certain changes. What changes he could bring were dependent both on his tenet, as well as his intention. Since he chose his tenet to be supremacy, he would interpret every facet of every law through the lens of supremacy. For example, if he wanted to freeze water, he would influence the battle between the forms of water itself, shifting the balance of the battle from the liquid state to the physical one. Temperature no longer had anything to do with it, not unless what he focused on was shifting the balance in temperature, causing it lose in the battle to hold on to its energy, causing a rapid drop in temperature which would in turn cause the liquid to turn to solid. The ways to achieve the exact same result were endless, and which ones he chose would determine the outcome, as well as how that outcome was achieved. He could also embody his tenet in himself, strengthening his body and enhancing his understanding of laws. The deeper his comprehension of laws, the easier it would be to rise to higher realms. Come to think about it, his understanding of laws was pretty decent, and the energy in his body was completely saturated. He might be able to go through another tribulation soon. Lex had not even completed the thought when he felt something tingly. He opened his eyes and looked up to see the 18th lightning bolt of his second tribulation forming. It was the exact same lightning beast he had fought before, and it looked angry. Lex smirked. Chapter 1238 Another Tribulation. The universe looked different in his eyes. He could see so much more about everything he looked at that he actually found it a little absurd. How could there be so many secrets in every little thing all around him that he never discovered his entire life? It was astounding. He was rapidly learning a lot about everything each and every moment, and though he expected that to slow down eventually as he spent enough time in this realm, it was at the moment increasing his comprehension of laws tremendously. Abstract concepts no longer seemed abstract. Instead, they made so much sense he wondered why he had never seen the simple truth before. At the same time, he also knew why. This body of his, everything about it was different. He could truly understand why this was called immortal, while even the nascent realm, as powerful as it was merely mortal. U//pp todated fr/o/m. The tribulation had changed him on a fundamental level, and the strange energy he felt fill him right after had finished the process. Even though Lex was now suddenly privy to many secrets of the universe, he still did not understand exactly how the tribulation changed him, and what that energy was. But he wasn't focused on it. Instead, he realized something very significant, something he had been blaming the system, and to a degree Mary with as well. There were certain secrets of the universe his mundane body, no matter how resilient it was not equipped to handle. In fact, Lex recalled the subtle sense of oppression and rejection he felt when he learned the name of the realm after Heavenly Immortal, which was the celestial immortal realm. Then, his domination moved in a way that only dragons could control their dragon's might. His aura mimicked his sword, and then mimicked his sword intent. It was invisible and without form, but that did not mean it did not exist. Lex stimulated his tenet, just a bit, and through his domination exerted his will on the laws around him. If it was a battle for supremacy, then it did not feel like it. After all, the laws did not resist him. Instead, in the way that the universe itself bent around to the will of the dragons, the laws around Lex readily converged according to Lex's will. Long before the beast of lightning could reach Lex, the air, the space, the darkness, the light, the heat, everything around him shimmered, revealing a white light greatly reminiscent of Lex's sword intent, and slashed at the lightning beast. Lex frowned as he felt the strain. He wasn't completely used to it yet, but it didn't matter. The result was satisfactory. The universe had unleashed a tribulation onto Lex, and so Lex used the universe itself to fight back. What fell onto Lex's body was not the electric beast, but the energy from the lightning bolt that would convert his body. Lex felt some stimulation in his right eye that he didn't quite understand. But there would be time to look into it later. For now, he turned his gaze to the dragon in front of him, and smiled. "They sent you after me?" Lex questioned, as if he heard the biggest joke of all. It was only after becoming an immortal that he began to understand that an immortal's greatest strength was the influence they had over laws, not their insanely strong bodies, or whatever other abilities they had. This was something that many of the immortals he had previously faced did not completely realize. That was the sole reason he had been able to confront them to begin with. Of course, for those who had begun to dabble with laws, Lex was doing that already as well, so only those who truly, deeply began to understand laws could have ever faced him even when he was in the nascent realm. Now that he was an immortal, the very thought that someone who did not rely on an immortal's greatest strength could defeat him was laughable. Lex opened his mouth to taunt the dragon a little, but the clouds above Lex suddenly rumbled once more. His third tribulation for the Earth Immortal realm was beginning. Chapter 1239, Trying Things Out. Lex looked up and saw the black clouds turning, and absorbing energy from the entire realm as they replenished their energy, and gave birth to new lightning bolts. The third tribulation would have 27 lightning strikes, as each tribulation increases the number of lightning strikes by 9. But after taking a glance at the lightning clouds, Lex turned his attention back to the dragon. He could not be bothered by this lightning. It was completely incapable of harming him, and even in this situation where it might harm him, overcoming the tribulation would fill him with traces of the strange immortal vitality that would aid in healing his body. Lex ignored it and turned back towards the dragon. "How many planets did you guys set my bounty as? Was it 32 planets? Or 23? Something like that, right?" The purple dragon stared back at him with anger bubbling in his eyes. Even suppressed as he was, there was not a shred of fear in his eyes. There was only anger and being made to kneel, at being humiliated. Lex withdrew his domination, freeing the dragon from his suppression. Lex genuinely expected the dragon to immediately attack him, and he did roar out angrily at Lex the moment he got free. Shockwaves blasted Lex and broke the ground, while even more chaos was stimulated within the zone. But, to Lex's immense surprise, the dragon did not attack. After he vented much of his anger through the roar, the dragon stood its ground, and stared at Lex, as if deep in contemplation. Lex shrugged, and turned back to the wyvern in the distance. So far, it had put up a lot less resistance than Lex expected. What he had gathered, Sanguis Pluvia were planning something pretty major in the tourney. but that was also fine. If that was the limit of his strength, then Lex would take his time and enjoy beating him up and forcing his hand. Lex's eye was attracted to something shining right behind Jeffrey, and he noticed a very familiar sight even though he could not recognize why it was familiar. It seemed like some metal ore, but it was way too pure to just be ore. Strangely, he felt the laws resist him this time. Intuitively he understood that last time, they had been cooperative because of the effect of his domination. He could try the same now and achieve the result he wanted, but his instincts were guiding him in another direction. Something within him was telling him to focus on his right eye. He channeled energy into his right eye, and suddenly array characters started to appear in the air around him, automatically turning into an array that did exactly what he wanted. This was also interesting, as for the first time he witnessed how arrays influenced laws to bring about the effects he wanted. Simultaneously, he understood that the ability in his eye was far from the simple demonstration he just did. The array that was formed was using all the characters that he knew, and were formed on the basis of his knowledge. But it was effortless and ridiculously quick. He recalled the days he struggled to quickly produce an array during a fight. He would never have that problem again. "You talk too much," Lex said, and grabbed the wyvern's mouth. Yet this time, instead of his hand going through the projection, he held on to it, as if he was touching the wyvern himself. Lex smiled. He recalled when abstract things happening within the midnight realm confused him, but right now they made so much sense. Lex was not touching the projection, nor was he touching the wyvern. What he was touching was the connection between the projection and the wyvern, and through it affecting the wyvern itself. Unfortunately, since Lex was still new to this, his application of his ability was still weak. By touching the connection, Lex could not transmit enough strength to actually hurt the wyvern. But it was enough to shut him up. Lightning struck Lex once more, and a slight electric buzz traveled from Lex to the wyvern, who was standing in shock, staring at Lex. The electric shock seemed to wake him up, and he finally reacted, breaking free of the connection. The projection in front of Lex disappeared, but that only made Lex chuckle. How could it be so easy to hide from Lex, especially now? Chapter 1240 Unholy Laws. "There's a change of plans," Jeffrey said as he furiously flapped his wings through the turbulent winds. Black clouds had covered the entire zone, and the lightning tribulation was only getting bigger and bigger. Ironically, because of how much energy the clouds were sucking up, the amount of chaos in the zone was not nearly as bad as it should have been. It was as if the excess energy that filled up the zone was being sucked up into the tribulation cloud, stabilizing the place. Though, at the moment, it still looked like the world was ending. Instead of catalyzing the eruption of the zone, killing everyone in it, we have to refocus our energies towards eliminating a single, anomalous immortal. There was no indication of who he was talking to, or if he was using some kind of device, but the stern expression on his face was quite revealing of the kind of response he was getting. "It's that Lex Williams, Damien's grandkid. He's even more aberrant than the dragon that entered the trial." The dragon was literally forced to its knees. D//sit for the B/est novel reading expiry/n/ce. There was another period of silence, before he spoke again. "Yes, I think so too. I'll keep him occupied while you..." The wyvern suddenly turned mid-flight and looked above himself when he saw the flash of a lightning bolt. Lex was right above him, standing in the air with his hands in his pockets, ignoring the lightning strike as usual. "Go ahead, finish your call." "I'll wait," he said. Lex grinned. Back on Earth, he'd read many books that depicted powerful beings and cultivators who became too powerful, or had lives that were too long, and as a result became depressed, or lost their emotions. Nothing could stimulate them anymore, and they grew bored with life. But the opposite seemed to be happening with Lex. Not only did he not get bored with his existing life, but his life continued to become so much more interesting the more powerful he became. The universe was so interesting. The challenges, the secrets, the obstacles it held were all so stimulating. Since Lex could see the fluctuations in the laws, he could understand how bizarrely complex they were, and felt supremely insignificant in front of the vastness of the universe. But that feeling of being small did not demoralize him. Instead, it let him know that there was still so much more to explore. Even if he spent a lifetime trying to understand laws, he could never grasp them completely. Fortunately, he was immortal now. Until the nascent realm, the average human cultivator had a lifespan of 500 years. But from the Earth immortal realm onwards, there was no lifespan anymore. He would live until he was killed. So he could take his time and fully experience everything this world had to offer. Suddenly feeling invigorated facing the increased threat of the lightning tribulation, Lex stopped holding back to an extent and unleashed his aura. Come on, old man. Show me more of this realm that I have stepped into. Show me all of your tricks. Just be mindful not to run out of tricks before me, or it might now end well for you. Lex activated his right eye while looking at the armored wyvern, and suddenly he began to gain a deeper understanding of the law that was infused with his armor. He still wasn't sure what it was exactly, but it was close to something that felt like festering decay. Perhaps there was no one word in the English language that could accurately describe what that law was. But it was intriguing how a concept could become a law. Lex suddenly felt the urge to try as well, and the grin on his face faded as he reached out deep into the universe and tried to personify the one most unholy of laws that he deeply identified with. Against the flaming, armored wyvern trying to kill him, Lex unleashed the law of capitalism. He wanted to see what effects this could bring about. Chapter 1241 How to Kill. Jeffrey was a level 4 Earth immortal. It wasn't the highest, but it took him years of effort to get here, moving from one realm at an excruciatingly slow pace. The progression was so slow, it was torturous, which is why he liked torturing others as well. Why should he be the only one to suffer? Yet never before in his life had he ever suffered the way he was suffering now. Lex was insufferably strong even before he became an immortal, to say little of when he actually gained an immortal physique. Moreover, he was already proficient in manipulating laws. That was not an ability immortals just gained. They had to train and practice for it. Jeffrey himself took over 70 years before he could successfully manipulate laws. It was not without reason that most immortals that Lex encountered did not use too many laws against him. It was because they weren't good enough at it to use in a fight. To top it all off, it hadn't yet been an hour since he became an immortal, and he was already overcoming his third tribulation. He'd almost caught up to him in cultivation. Compared to before, where Jeffrey was just strongly irritated at Lex, he now began to genuinely hate him. But a genius though he may be, the one thing Lex could not compete with him in was in craftiness. The wyvern attacked, holding nothing back. The armor itself carried an immensely powerful law that actually made the armor more of a weapon than a defensive equipment. Jeffrey combined the armor's attack with his own flames, and even manipulated laws himself as well. He sharpened his claws through the use of laws, ready to tear through Lex's defense this time. Just as his attack was about to reach Lex, the irritating human did something. Jeffrey felt the air around him get thick, and a powerful force begin to restrict him. Before anything could happen, Jeffrey unleashed his attack. His sharp, flaming claws which contained a lethal curse in them gouged Lex, forcing its way through the resistance. But something strange happened. Instead of carving through Lex's body, his claws fell harmlessly on him, suddenly devoid of all strength. If someone were looking from afar, it would seem like Jeffrey was feeling the material of Lex's suit. U///pp todated fr/o/m. I know a good old beating doesn't work. Should I try to rip the soul out of the body? Lex turned his hand into the soul state and grabbed Jeffrey's slimy soul. If he wanted to make Jeffrey desperate, he had to let the wyvern think that Lex was genuinely trying to kill him, but was falling just short. He squeezed the wyvern's soul, but interestingly enough the soul suddenly became formless and slipped through Lex's fingers. Lex raised an eyebrow. That was new. Maybe the trick to killing an immortal is to destroy their tenets, Lex said, teleporting away and reappearing in front of the escaping Jeffrey once more. This time, his hand tore through the wyvern's chest first before transitioning into the soul state, trying to reach for the tenets. Yet before he could reach them, the armor Jeffrey was wearing moved on its own and slammed into Lex's face, throwing him back. The timing coincided perfectly with a lightning bolt, and though Lex was not injured, he had to admit the lightning was beginning to hurt. Maybe he should start resisting it soon. How about I suppress you using laws? Lex asked as he flipped his body, and got ready to attack the wyvern once more. Do you think if I smother you in some kind of law, that will kill you? Instead of answering, Jeffrey only growled, and pulled out more weapons. The two dashed towards each other and fought. Each of their clashes was like a clap of thunder, which was confusing because there was real thunder all around them. Another lightning bolt struck Lex just as he punched Jeffrey, forming a circuit and allowing the electricity to pass through the brutalized wyvern. Why aren't you talking anymore, Jeffrey? I thought you loved talking. Chapter 1242 Passing a Threshold. If one were to see Lex, it would seem like he was extremely angry, yet that was far from the truth. Even as he beat Jeffrey up, Lex had a firm control over his anger, keeping it thoroughly suppressed. He was not here to vent his anger. No, he was here to kill Damien, destroy Sanguis Pluvia and make anyone who harmed Moon pay dearly. For that, he needed absolute precision. That was why, on a surface level, he felt various emotions. He felt the excitement of a new realm, the curiosity over what the universe had to offer, the feeling of getting revenge by beating Jeffrey. But deep down, Lex was in full control of his every action, making sure he never went too far, and never ruined the plan. That was why, when each and every hit he landed on Jeffrey became stronger slowly and steadily, it was actually a deliberate thing. He wanted it to look like he was becoming more and more comfortable with the realm, making Jeffrey feel like death was creeping up on him. Enough! Jeffrey roared after Lex slapped him one more time, right across the face. The wyvern took to the air and summoned hundreds of barrels, each of them giving Lex an ominous feeling. He was reminded of the extremely lethal poison that Jeffrey used back on Polbetvi. Lex had learned that the poison was actually something called Jahal liquid, sourced from a place called Jahalbog realm. It was not just lethal to people, it was hazardous to the realm itself. The danger Lex felt from these barrels, which too were made of void wood like the very ones used to contain Jahal liquid, was much more serious. Meanwhile, the fight continued. By now, Lex's expression had warped, as if he were tired of playing games and wanted to kill Jeffrey. But he had to pause his pursuit, because the final lightning bolt of his third tribulation was about to fall, and the very same lightning beast was back. Jeffrey, meanwhile, used the moment's respite to run away faster, taking out more and more weapons and unleashing them blindly towards Lex. He did not think he could kill that nightmare. He just wanted to buy time. Just as Lex was getting ready to face the lightning monster, he felt something. He felt Jeffrey's developing fear, his developing trauma, and he felt the invincible tyrant's mask absorbing that fear, and becoming stronger. A small smile crept up on his lips as he resisted Jeffrey's attacks while glaring at the lightning monster. If Jeffrey was afraid, then he was getting desperate. But it was not enough. Things were only just beginning. Lex unleashed more of his strength, and this time did not wait for the lightning beast to gather its energy. His sword intent covering his sword, he flew through the air towards the black clouds, gathering all his strength, bearing his domination in full and even subtly using some laws to strengthen him. His tenet had not recovered from its exhaustion, but he could still use it a little. Except that Lex made one mistake. In taking the lightning monster seriously, he used a little too much strength, causing a reaction in the laws around him. Something in his mind clicked, and he realized that it was not just his domination that made law manipulation easier, his sword intent did so too. Perhaps, there were other things as well which could make law manipulation easier, like the effects of his right eye. Lex's sword strike cleaved through the black clouds. From all around the trial zone, the survivors who were huddling and hiding from the lightning and the volcanic eruptions felt the sharpness of his attack and looked towards Lex from a distance. They felt like that attack had surpassed some kind of barrier. Indeed, it had passed a threshold. It allowed Lex to gain enough new understanding about laws to immediately trigger his level 4 lightning tribulation. Chapter 1243 Calculated Risk. Lex felt the hair on his body rise as his instincts tingle. The first 3 tribulations, for Lex, were hardly a problem. Besides the last attacks, which required his attention, he could largely ignore them. Yet even before its first strike, Lex felt danger from the 4th tribulation. This was also something he had known about. While the immortal realms were divided into levels, each set of 3 formed a small group. From level 1 to 3, an immortal was considered to be in the early stage of their realm. 4 to 6 was the middle of the realm, while 7 to 9 was the peak of the realm. At the same time, the difficulty of the tribulation for each stage increased proportionally. Now that he was facing the 4th tribulation, Lex actually felt threatened. This was not because Lex wasn't strong enough to take it. Far from it. It was because after becoming an immortal he hadn't had an opportunity for his body to heal and recover to its new peak. Even though he was in no danger, the fire tribulation had weakened and exhausted him severely. It was also a little unfair to ask someone who had just entered the immortal realm to face a 4th level tribulation. Let alone learning about how to effectively manipulate laws, Lex didn't even understand the limits and abilities of his body yet. He was more than certain that the things he could do were far more than what he had explored so far. After all, he had absorbed a Tao-level ingredient. He was sure the mutations to his eyes had something to do with it. Exploring further would yield even more results. But fair or not hardly mattered. Since the tribulation had come, he would face it. In fact, he suddenly recalled something. He had tribulation rooms in his inn, but to improve them further he needed to collect various types of lightning and fires himself. He wondered if he could capture genuine tribulation lightning. Lex accessed his spatial ring and took out an inhaler and sprayed it in his mouth. This was one of the many items he had prepared beforehand for this fight. Lex was not arrogant enough to believe he could take on such a massive organization without aid, so he had procured the best and most effective medicines for Earth immortals available at the Infinity Emporium. Instantly a rush of energy filled him and began to heal him. Speaking of healing, shouldn't his own healing be even better than before? He'd have to experiment to find out. He turned his gaze towards Jeffrey, who had run away. But distance meant nothing to Lex. He teleported over to Jeffrey, his sword fully coated in sword intent and domination, and slashed with the same strength and intensity as the one he used against the lightning beast. He wanted the wyvern to think that Lex was feeling pressured because of the tribulation, so he was in a rush to eliminate him. Yet, to Lex's immense surprise, this time his sword did not cut through the wyvern despite being stronger than any of his previous attacks. A gray shield appeared in front of Jeffrey, protecting him. Lex didn't give him time to finish. Since these shields were produced by a heavenly immortal, they genuinely were above his ability to surpass at the moment. But Lex was not unprepared. He summoned a massive missile above him, one of the many he had stolen from Pelvalen, and threw it at another figure. At the same time, Lex teleported out of Heaven's furnace, just in time to catch a lightning bolt to the face. Lex groaned, but didn't stop running away. He did not want to test himself against a heavenly immortal level attack. Suddenly Lex stopped. Or rather, it would be more specific to say that his teleportation ability was forcibly stopped as the space within the zone trembled. Even the tribulation cloud seemed slightly affected by the change happening, though the tribulation just became stronger until it could ignore the external influence. Lex looked back just as he felt Heaven's furnace collapse, and his pupils constricted. He saw nothing. There was nothing to see, for the tiny black hole that had appeared began sucking even light inside of itself. Lex instantly changed to his soul form and tried to escape through the soul plane, but it was pointless. The black hole existed within the soul plane as well, and slowly Lex began to feel himself being pulled towards the black hole. It was at that moment Lex wondered if using the missile might have been a little overboard. But he had taken a calculated risk, and he was certain that Jeffrey would have a way to stop this. After all, Jeffrey was a lot closer to the black hole than Lex. In case he wasn't already dead, he would stop the black hole. In case he was, then Lex would be returning to the midnight Inn promptly. A lightning bolt struck Lex, somehow resisting the pull of the black hole, yet it was the only thing that could resist that pull, and even then it was because the tiny black hole's gravitational pull was less than 1% of a real black hole. The ocean of lava that covered the massive landmass suddenly began to rise altogether, while the landmass itself began to morph. Lex couldn't decide whether to be afraid or impressed as he saw that even the laws within this place were being pulled into the black hole, becoming a part of it, and making it stronger. Yet before the black hole could really begin to gain momentum, it abruptly came to an end. It vanished, as if it wasn't there to begin with. Lex's eyes gleamed as he teleported over to his original location, and saw the devastation. Surprisingly, of the 13 figures, 11 were still there. Their gray shields were all gone, and so was their camouflage, but at least they seemed unharmed. For once, Lex was impressed. But he did not intend on asking them how they did it. Instead, he once again unleashed Golden Inferno. Chapter 1244 Major Hint. The battle raged in full force as Lex and the other immortals tried to kill each other, right above the floating sea of lava. From afar, those immortals who were watching the fight, full of fear and apprehension, were surprised to see the flow of battle was not what was expected. Perhaps in lower realms, a person fighting against multiple opponents in the same realm was not inconceivable, yet the immortal realms were not the same just due to how diverse the applications of laws were. Everyone usually honed a few laws, forming them into extremely potent techniques to deal with various situations. When multiple immortals fought together, even if all of them were bad manipulating laws, their sheer number would make it difficult for a lone immortal to fight against them. To do that, the lone immortal would have to have such a strong control over laws, just to ward off the various laws targeting him, that he may as well be multiple levels above the whole group within the immortal realm. Yet the situation they were currently seeing was as far from that as possible. Not only was Lex's level weaker than the rest, he was actually actively experiencing the tribulation to enter the middle levels of the immortal realm. Despite his serious disadvantages, instead of Lex fighting off the 11 immortals, it was the other way around. Sword in hand, Lex was altering the landscape of the zone as each of his strikes cut through the lava sea and left deep gorges in the landmass. Golden flames burned in the skies, morphed into mythical beasts as they attacked each of the immortals. Lightning bolts struck Lex from the sky, but dozens of tornadoes, formed from lava, rocks, and devastating winds, crashed into the escaping immortals. 11 immortals fought off Lex's calamitous attacks while trying to distance themselves from him, but it was impossible. The longer Lex fought, and the more he became accustomed to his power, the better he was able to control laws. Instead of reaching for some ambiguous, unfamiliar laws, the moment he tried manipulating space he realized how easy it was for him. Combined with his natural affinity for creating barriers, Lex began arranging blockades around their battlefield, closing the immortals in. The only reason most of them managed to survive so long without being completely overwhelmed was because they had numerous tools with them that helped them survive. Some tried to practice the ancient wisdom that offense is the best defense. Unfortunately for them, Lex was a master in the realm of defense. He kept domination blasted on full, which was no longer a simple aura technique, though nothing about it was simple to begin with. The laws within the region of domination became extremely cooperative with Lex, changing on their own to suit his desires. He had really only learned one sword technique, Inferno Blade, which consisted of various attacks. He clicked his teeth and produced a small flicker of golden flame which he coated his sword with and attacked. Inferno Blade, Judgment. Lex attacked the nearest immortal, some kind of worm that wore an armor containing laws related to misconception. As a result, most of Lex's attacks would never land on the worm itself, but just narrowly miss it. But with domination focused solely on the worm, Golden Inferno's unquenchable hunger to burn, even overcoming other laws, his sword intent and the absolute peak brute force he could muster, Lex managed to overcome the effects of the armor. He cut through the 10-feet-long worm as if it was air, cutting its body in two. Lex had cut other immortals before as well, yet this time was different. Even though Inferno Blade, Judgment was not an attack at the immortal level, Lex had learned something important during the fight. Usually, immortals manipulate laws to produce certain effects. But they could also produce actual or physical changes, and if they were on a significant enough level, they would elicit a change in laws as well. These immortals, much like Jeffrey, had some way that Lex could not yet detect which would allow them to recreate their bodies if harmed. Yet with the overbearing power of domination, Golden Inferno, his sword intent, as well as the massive force produced by Inferno Blade combined with his own physical strength, all laws were rendered ineffective. Lex saw the change happen with his left eye. For a moment, the worm gave off feelings of consumption, greed, and harvest. It was unusual, as Lex could not understand why the worm, in the midst of combat, started radiating these auras. Then he saw domination twist them as the golden flames burned them. He saw his strength cleave through them, and all the rest of his attacks consume them in some way. All of his attacks, together, fought a great battle against those sensations. It was a battle for the right to exist, but more importantly, in Lex's eyes, it was a battle for supremacy, one that those feelings lost. Something in Lex's mind clicked, as he realized that his tenet had battled the worms, somehow, and Lex emerged victorious. Something snapped, and the worm, split in half as it was, suddenly lost its energy, falling limp. No new body formed. There was no more resistance. That one, single confrontation resulted in the direct death of the worm, and the stalemate that was held for so long broke. The number of his enemies reduced, while he himself gained a huge hint about how to kill immortals. Crushing their tenets thoroughly and completely was one way to do it. He looked up, and caught Jeffrey's eye. The mood on the battlefield suddenly changed. Chapter 1245 Black Pillar. The shift was far from subtle. The 11 immortals had been working together to resist Lex's assault, keeping him from doing any significant damage. Their strategy, while defense-oriented, was not bad. They did not need to harm Lex themselves. After all, they'd already learnt that if they took out overpowered treasures, so could he. So instead of pushing him, they were just holding him at bay, and letting the tribulation do the damage. The tribulation was already at the level where Lex could no longer simply ignore it. The energy within the lightning bolts could nourish Lex, evolving his body further, but the laws within were purely harmful. The plan was sound, but it could no longer work. Not only was Lex acclimatizing to his new realm a lot faster than any of them anticipated, he had enough brute power to kill them. His application of his strength to overwhelm an immortal's tenets was actually one of the hardest ways to kill another immortal. There were many, much more efficient and effective ways to kill them, but they were not things one would easily stumble upon. Immortals, in general, did not spread the ways in which other immortals could be killed. It was not enough to be a secret, but it was at the level where a new immortal without sufficient connections or background would have trouble finding out. That was not a problem for Lex. In fact, he already had a very thick document he'd purchased from the Emporium with this information, but he hadn't read it yet. If things became critical, he'd peek into it. For now, he was satisfied with slowly building up the pressure. Lex teleported towards Jeffrey as if intending to take him down with the same power, yet the others acted as well. They couldn't let Lex take the initiative anymore, and so preemptively attacked him. With absolutely no defense in place, the lightning bolt burned through Lex's suit, which had so far survived with Lex's help, revealing his chiseled body. The immortals fighting Lex suddenly felt immensely intimidated when they saw the state of his body. After having gone through a fire tribulation just a short while ago, being struck by countless lightning strikes and suffering through all their attacks, Lex's body was in pristine condition. It was as if it had completely healed from all its injuries long ago, and even with the burns from the latest lightning strike, it hardly looked like Lex was weakened at all. They redoubled their focus, increasing the pressure Lex was feeling. Lex, in turn, tried to attack the immortals. But whether it was his physical strength or his techniques, they seemed immensely weakened. It was as if whatever laws were involved for each of his actions were suddenly muted, or separated from him by an invisible veil. The feeling of danger increased, and Lex for the first time encountered something domination could not affect at all. It could bend the laws of the universe to its will, but it could do nothing if those very laws were out of reach. A part of Lex's mind found this situation very interesting. This was a very innovative way to attack other immortals' tenets, and reinforced Lex's beliefs that attacking tenets was one of the most effective ways to kill an immortal, though he was certain there had to be other ways to do it as well. Lex coughed again as the pressure on his tenet increased. He wasn't able to easily discover a way to resolve his predicament. There were a few techniques he had not used yet, but he wanted to keep those secret for as long as possible. After all, the fight had just begun. Lex activated his left eye, trying to gain deeper insight into what it was that was oppressing him and hiding all the other laws. He saw a massive, black pillar covering the area all around him, pushing away all the other laws in the region it occupied. The pillar did not actually exist, but was only a manifestation of whatever it was that was keeping him suppressed. He could not understand what it was, but he could see what it was doing to his tenet. Chapter 1246 Consequences of his Genius. According to Lex's understanding of how tenets worked, the more he used it to influence a law, the more it would be drained. The greater his own understanding of that particular law, the less the strain would be, whereas conversely the less he understood a certain law, the more strain he would have to endure. Lex also believed that there had to be some way to strengthen his tenet, though he did not yet understand what it was. The stronger his tenet was, the longer he could influence laws, and to a greater extent. Based solely on those things, Lex assumed that the Black Pillar was actually some obscure law that Lex had never encountered before, or did not understand. The other immortals were, somehow, strengthening or boosting it to the point where there was no other law around him, and no escape for him. Even if he tried to fly in a straight line towards the nearest immortal, and outside the territory of the Black Pillar, he would never make it out. Lex would feel like he was flying at his fastest, and traversing thousands of miles, yet barely cover a few feet. Another lightning bolt struck him, and since he was not able to react at all due to the unusual suppression from the Black Pillar, he was thrown to the ground, both his shoulders completely charred. Lex grimaced. It was time to resolve the issue, or use his hidden techniques, though he wondered how effective they would be. If all laws were being suppressed, then the ones that were needed for his other techniques should be as well. He had to admit, this was a difficult situation to break out of, but the challenge only motivated him. Since Lex had decided to walk the path of supremacy, how could it ever be easy? He had chosen to walk the path filled with adversity, and this was his first major obstacle. Lex narrowed his eyes and focused. He did not try to control the Black Pillar. Not only did he not know what that was, he was certain the strain of trying to control it would immediately exhaust his tenet. Instead, he tried to apply the same principle the Black Pillar was using. Now he used those techniques, fueling them with his sword intent, even though he was not being attacked technically. There was a vacuum of laws around him, yet he summoned them to him. His tenet fought against the pressure it was under, and reached out despite it. Neither suppression nor oppression affected the use of his tenet, for the path of supremacy was destined to be one filled with trials and obstacles. The summons of his tenet were augmented by his sword techniques, which sent shivers down the Black Pillar. Naraka hummed. It did not know how, it did not know why, but it felt that something was preventing it from using its full strength, and so the sword hummed. It lent Lex its strength, which he used to practice out Stalwart Guardian, under the intense gaze of 10 hostile immortals. In the face of absolute suppression and superiority, Lex fought back, and summoned the laws of the universe to himself. While the Black Pillar tried to suppress him, he tried to replace it. His actions, his intentions, and the consequences of both of them formed a literal and metaphorical battle for supremacy for the laws around himself against the Black Pillar. Lex, by pure happenstance, embodied the very nature and soul of his tenet, something most immortals did not achieve for a very long time, causing the strength of his tenet to explode temporarily. The pillar trembled, and the immortals summoning it suddenly paled. Then it broke, and the laws of the universe quivered to rush back in. But they were pushed aside. The area around Lex was the domain of absolute defense, and hundreds of laws associated with it came rushing in, trembling with excitement. In that moment, Lex understood how to better use his tenet, and he understood what an immortal's domain was. But instead of feeling happy, he groaned, and looked upwards. His fourth tribulation had not finished, yet his fifth tribulation had been provoked. Chapter 1247 Double Tribulation. The immortals looked at Lex, horrified. What kind of monster were they facing? How was it possible for a single, new immortal to fight against the concentrated efforts of 9 immortals using their tenets together for a single purpose? How was it possible for Lex to personify his tenets so easily? Even if a person knew about the benefits of personifying their tenets, actually achieving it was not easy. But that was, in a way, a benefit of a single, simple tenet. It was much simpler to resonate with it. As a consequence, it lacked the versatility of more complex tenets. The immortals were in genuine shock, yet listening to Jeffrey's advice, they had already planned for failure. That is why only 9 immortals worked together to summon the pillar, not 10. The 10th was setting up their subsequent attack. Yet the momentary delay their shock robbed them of the opportunity to continue attacking Lex. Now that Lex had learned a new way to attack tenets, a new way to use laws, and a new way to use his tenet, he wanted to test it out. Especially since he gained an innate understanding of something called a domain. Simply speaking, a domain was an area within which the laws were completely under an immortal's control. It reminded Lex of sealed domains, which were areas completely cut off from the world and had their own laws sometimes. Regardless, the concept of domains was very interesting, and Lex could understand through very recent experience why an area where he could not access any law would be dangerous. Simply said, 9 immortals joined together to put Lex inside a domain. Lex got the feeling that ordinarily, Earth immortals might not be able to control domains. It seemed overpowered, not to mention that he had never heard of, or ever encountered one before. NOV-LB//JNN. He looked forward to testing out how useful it was, though he felt restricting it to a single law was very wasteful. If he could incorporate a few more laws, and maybe even add elements of his domination and golden inferno in it, it would be an incredible sight to behold. But that might be easier said than done. One of the 3 immortals died, his body blowing up as if a bomb had been set off inside of him, and the other 2 were not far behind him. Lex's eyes gleamed as he finally confirmed another way to kill immortals, though this also ultimately targeted tenets. His next idea was to test the mind, affecting their personalities, making them behave contrary to their tenets. He wondered how that would affect them. Yet before the next 2 immortals died, before the other immortals thought of a way to resolve the threat that was Lex, and before Lex finalized his next plan of attack, there was a change. A bolt of lightning struck Lex from his 4th tribulation, but Lex's domain easily blocked it. Yet something happened immediately after that which was not supposed to even be possible, let alone happen. Lex's 5th tribulation, which was only supposed to trigger once his 4th one was complete, struck him down with a bolt of lightning, almost shattering Lex's domain. Everyone was stunned, Lex included. How in the hell was he experiencing 2 tribulations at the same time? It didn't make sense, yet the immortals rejoiced, and Jeffrey delayed his escape plans. Maybe there was hope of defeating him. Lex, on the other hand, frowned. Things were getting out of hand now. It was best if he sped up his spring cleaning. He took in a deep breath, and let his domain fade. Just as the immortals thought he ran out of energy, a deep and overwhelming aura emerged from Lex's body, far beyond even his domination. On Lex's bareback, a lotus tattoo began to form. Chapter 1248 Time Limit. Lotus had accompanied Lex for a long time, and had played a significant part in Lex's journey. Before anything else, Lotus was the first one to evolve Lex's body, making him stronger and more durable than others in his realm, which was a quality that continued throughout his realms. There were times it cured poisons, not only in Lex but in others as well, absorbing excess energy to prevent Lex from blowing up, and countless other times it had been extremely useful. It was kind of sad to see him go, but at the same time it obviously wouldn't live with Lex all its life either. At least since they were bonded, they could stay connected, and continue to benefit each other. Initially, that's what Lex thought. In fact, Lotus had only been even more helpful to Lex since it left his body and drastically increased the feedback Lex got from him. Lotus, due to the immense amount of energy contained within the realm that it was trying to fuse with, spent more time lucid as well, and Lex had taken time to chat with him every now and then. Lotus was incredibly powerful, but its greatest ability as far as Lex was concerned was directly turning energy into matter. That was one of the most broken abilities Lex had ever even heard of, and its applications were limitless. Lotus, being a baby, could not articulate how he used the ability, so it just proposed that Lex can just try using the ability himself. Since they were bonded, Lotus could share its ability with Lex temporarily. Naturally, Lex was interested, but they discovered that as powerful as Lex's body was, it could not sustain the pressure of Lotus' ability. Despite his affinity for countless laws, and ability to bear immense pressure, there were just some things a mortal body could not do. Constrained by his rapidly dwindling energy reserves, Lex made use of another, minor ability he gained as a result of the tattoo, which was to suck the energy out of anything he touched. In less than half a second, the immortal was drained of all his energy, becoming a literal husk. His tenets withered out and his soul just extinguished. Lex, on the other hand, gained 3 more seconds of energy to sustain his tattoo, bringing him to a total of 5.5. "We need to abort the mission," one immortal said as he retreated, but suddenly found a barrier restricting him. It was not one of Lex's shields that blocked them. Rather, it was Jeffrey's. The moment Lex began to emit his dangerous aura, the wyvern did not hesitate at all. It erected a massive barrier around his comrades and saluted them for their sacrifice of buying him time. Lex, who was feeding on and could feel Jeffrey's desperation and fear, smiled. Under a rain of lightning strikes, he discovered yet another way to kill an immortal. Empowered by the Lotus tattoo, Lex discovered that his physical strength transcended to another realm altogether. All it would take was one slap to completely overpower any laws connected to an immortal, preventing them from using any laws that would allow them to recover from the complete and total obliteration of their body. It also prevented them from saving their souls at the last moment, transferring it from their existing body to the new one. 10 seconds later, even though he had plenty of energy left, the Lotus tattoo faded on its own. It seemed like he could not escape the time constraint in the end, but that was still good enough. Wiping the sweat off his brow, Lex turned towards where Jeffrey ran. It was time to follow him. Up above, in the sky, the final bolt of his 4th tribulation had already turned into a lightning beast, but it had not attacked Lex yet. Instead, with eyes filled with intelligence, it looked at the clouds for the 5th tribulation to end, so that it could accompany a partner. Chapter 1249 Illusion. Traveling to and from the Trial of Eternity required special means. The Henali had arranged for the zone to be checked once a year, but Jeffrey naturally had his own means of exiting the zone. Since their original plan was to make this place so dangerous that everyone in it would die, of course Jeffrey did not plan on staying here. Although this exit was quicker than anticipated, an emergency exit had been prepared from the very first day. It was not a ship that could traverse the void, but a portable wormhole that could forcefully create an entrance within the zone. The wormhole's very presence in this place would spell disaster for whatever location was linked to it, but since when did Jeffrey care? The delay caused by the other immortals being trapped with Lex even bought him enough time to set up everything for his escape and then leave. The problem was that now that the wormhole had been opened, he couldn't enter it for some reason. As soon as he attempted to come near the portal, his body began to subtly emit a green light which forced him to keep his distance. He had no idea what this light was, where it came from, or why it was preventing him from leaving. Every second he tried to enter but couldn't, he felt more and more fear grip his heart. Was this planned by Lex? Was that the reason he was targeting the others first? He had done something to him, preventing him from leaving. The more he thought about it, the more he believed it. After all, this is exactly what he himself would do. He would play with his target, relishing their pain and anguish as they realized that there was no hope to begin with. Then, just as they had that realization, he would arrive in person to watch their demise. Jeffrey, meanwhile, grit his teeth and decided to do something desperate. Within his body, he had a certain, high-quality crystal that was completely hidden, undetectable to even Lex through the wyvern's body. With nothing left to lose, the wyvern glared at Lex heatedly, as if he wanted to eat Lex whole, and crushed the crystal. Lex suddenly sensed danger and tried to dodge, but as if his tribulation was sentient, it struck him exactly then, causing him to freeze momentarily. The fraction of a second's delay was all it was needed. Jeffrey's body blew up. There was no build-up, and no real warning. It suddenly exploded with such immense ferocity that the lightning tribulation clouds in the sky were disturbed, and a massive fissure broke through to the depth of the landmass. The dark zone was suddenly filled with so much light that it was nearly blinding. The light was quickly followed by a searing heat that threatened to cook even immortal meat. As if a chain reaction had been set off, all the laws of the zone which were edging towards chaos suddenly went haywire, acting without rhyme or reason. Liquid fire rained from the sky. Solid ice shot out from within the landmass. Lightning, misshapen and formless, like gas, slammed into the ground, causing devastating destruction. The zone fell onto the verge of destruction, and it seemed like Jeffrey was able to complete his mission after all. It just took a few extra steps. Somewhere far above all this chaos, even above the now dispersing black clouds, the wyvern's body slowly reformed. As he saw the clouds disperse, he finally sighed in relief. The accursed human was finally dead, though admittedly Jeffrey had paid a great price for it. "Oh, is this what you have planned?" a voice boomed through the sky, freezing the wyvern. The wyvern looked up, and saw the damned human. Except, instead of appearing normally, the human's figure was massive, filling up the entire sky. "Suicide bombs. How original," he said, as if he didn't sound too impressed. At that moment, Jeffrey realized that he was trapped in an illusion, and he didn't know since when. Chapter 1250. Glad you could make it. Lex had trained and strengthened all his abilities, so how could he leave mind meld behind? But compared to his other methods, which could be forced, mind meld required an element of subtlety, at least for those in a similar realm as himself. This could change if Lex drastically increased his spirit and mental power, but it was something he had never focused on before, so he was not at an overwhelming advantage for now. NOVLB //JNN. That is why, the moment Lex slapped the wyvern, he had actually already put him under the influence of the mind meld. But, since he was concerned that the wyvern might be able to detect signs of infiltration in his mind, within the illusion as well, he made himself try to search the wyvern's brain, while allowing the wyvern to secretly resist. This way, even if the wyvern detected the intrusion, it would feel like it was successfully hiding from Lex. Lex peeked in on the wyvern's plans for a bit, and allowed the situation to progress according to his expectations. Just as he felt some hope, Lex revealed himself. The point was to push Jeffrey to the limits of desperation, so that he would unveil all his hidden cards, and Lex could feel that they were almost there. "Some kind of explosive crystal inside your body, huh?" Lex said, and dug his hand inside the wyvern's body. The pain woke Jeffrey up from the illusion, and he tried to initiate the self-destruction, but now that Lex knew about it, how could he let it activate? Lex grabbed the crystal and pulled it out of the gaping hole in Jeffrey's body. The wyvern screamed and yelled in anger, but Lex was not paying attention to him. Instead, he observed the crystal with his left eye. It did not contain energy, but something else. As far as he could tell, once the crystal broke, whatever was inside would act as a catalyst in making laws behave chaotically. He put it away in his spatial ring for later, and then looked at Jeffrey. "Is that all you have? Was that how you were going to make me regret things? Had everything been an illusion all along?" How strong was Lex's spirit to begin with? He felt time pass. How could everything have only happened inside his illusion? "What's the matter, Jeff?" Lex asked casually. "We've barely just started. Look alive, we have a lot more to go through. You know, I can alter the flow of time in my illusions. A second in reality is equal to 100 years, and we haven't even passed the first second of our battle yet. I feel like we're going to have a great time getting to know one another." Of course, everything Lex said was a lie. He could not affect the flow of time in his illusions, though he could mildly affect perception. But did he even need to affect the flow of time? As long as his target believed he could, that was enough. Wild, desperate panic took hold of Jeffrey's heart, and the immortal wyvern began experiencing a panic attack. For immortals, such a thing was much harder to achieve than for mortals, which is why it was also much more dangerous. There was another name for not just panic attacks, but all kinds of mental diseases for immortals: heart demon. A heart demon formed within Jeffrey's mind as his sanity tried to figure out what was real and what wasn't. Outside the illusion, Lex smiled. That was actually easier than he thought. Getting besieged was actually much harder than triggering a heart demon, which had been one of his objectives all along. After all, the thing about heart demons was that, like all demons, they could be completely controlled by devils. In fact, Lex had once met a heart demon named Promote in the first Midnight Games, which is how he got the idea to use one. But the heart demons which infected immortals were much stronger, and more difficult to control. Fortunately, Lex was well connected. From his spatial ring, Lex summoned a small bead and crushed it. A few moments later, a portal similar to the wormhole opened within the zone, and Lilith Val Kilger stepped into the Trial of Eternity. "Hey Lilith, glad you could make it," Lex said with a smile. At that very moment, he was struck by lightning.